I sit in my truck staring at the shimmering lights of the Grand Hyatt Hotel where my father-in-law's retirement party awaits. My calloused hands grip the steering wheel, betraying my profession as a construction worker. Amanda, my wife of 8 years, checks her makeup in the visor mirror for the 5th time. "Remember what I said, Bartholomew? You are a disgrace to this family. Do not embarrass us tonight," she hisses, not even looking at me. The words cut deep, but I force a smile, nodding silently. This was nothing new in our marriage. Before we dive into what happened next at that retirement party, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever felt out of place in your own family. I promise what happened when we walked through those doors changed everything. My relationship with Amanda began 12 years ago when we were both students at Boston University. I was studying business management on a partial scholarship, working nights to cover the rest. Amanda was a marketing major, daughter of Harold Wilson, the CEO of Wilson Development Group, one of the largest real estate development companies in New England. We met in an economics class where my practical knowledge often impressed our professor. Amanda was attracted to my ambition and work ethic. During those early days, I was determined to build my own business empire someday, and she saw potential in me that matched her family expectations. When I first met the Wilsons, things were different. Harold seemed impressed by my knowledge of business concepts and market trends. His wife, Catherine, was polite, if somewhat reserved. Amanda proudly introduced me as her brilliant boyfriend who will probably run his own company before he turns 30. Everything changed during our senior year when my mother got sick. The medical bills piled up, and I had to make a choice between finishing my degree or helping my family. I chose family, dropping out of college to work full-time in construction, a trade I had learned from my father during summer breaks. Amanda was supportive at first, calling it a temporary setback. We stayed together, and 2 years later, we married in a ceremony that the Wilsons insisted on paying for, though I noticed it was considerably scaled back from what Amanda had originally planned. After the wedding, the Wilsons' true feelings about my career choice became increasingly apparent. At family gatherings, Harold would introduce me as Amanda's husband who works in construction, his tone suggesting it was a regrettable condition. Catherine would quickly change the subject whenever anyone asked about my work. "Could you at least say you are in residential development instead of construction?" Amanda once suggested after a particularly uncomfortable dinner with her parents. "It sounds more professional," I refused. My father had been a builder his entire life, and I was proud of the skills he had taught me. I had worked my way up to foreman and was saving to start my own contracting business. But to the Wilsons, I would always be just a blue-collar worker who was not good enough for their daughter. As years passed, Amanda grew more disappointed and resentful. The ambitious student she married had settled for manual labor instead of pursuing the corporate success she had envisioned. She began attending family functions without me making excuses about my work schedule or claiming I was not feeling well. "They are business events anyway," she would say. "You would be bored and uncomfortable." The truth was that she was uncomfortable having me there dressed in clothes that were not designer brands, making conversation about practical matters rather than stock portfolios or vacation homes. The invitation to Harold's retirement party arrived 3 weeks ago, an elaborate cream envelope with gold lettering. Amanda handed it to me with clear instructions. "You need to be there, but please try to blend in. Do not talk about construction projects or tell your work stories. Just smile, congratulate my father, and try not to stand out." I spent $200 I could not really afford on a new suit for the occasion. When I tried it on for Amanda, she frowned. "It looks cheap," she said, turning back to her closet to select her own outfit. "But I guess it will have to do." The morning of the party, Amanda went through a detailed list of do's and don'ts. Do not drink more than 1 glass of champagne. Do not use industry jargon. Do not mention that her father once needed my help fixing the deck at their summer house. "You are a disgrace to this family," she said, as we were getting ready to leave. "Try not to embarrass us just this once." I stood there, tie half nodded as her words sank in. After 12 years together, 8 of them married, this was how she saw me. A disgrace. Not a hardworking man who had sacrificed his own dreams to support his family. Not a loving husband who had stood by her through job changes and personal crises. A disgrace. I finished dressing in silence, drove us to the hotel, and parked the truck. I was still paying off in a lot full of luxury vehicles. The Grand Hyatt ballroom was transformed for the occasion, crystal chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors. At least 200 guests mingled around cocktail tables, draped in white linen, while servers circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Amanda immediately spotted a group of her father's colleagues and steered us in their direction. As we approached, she squeezed my arm painfully. "Remember, just smile and keep quiet," she whispered. "Mandy, you look stunning," greeted a silver-haired woman in a designer dress. "Is this your husband? I do not think we have met." "Yes, this is Bartholomew," Amanda replied, then quickly changed the subject before I could even extend my hand. "Is that a new necklace? It is absolutely gorgeous." Throughout the next hour, this scene repeated itself with various groups. Amanda would make sure I was physically present but socially invisible. When people directly addressed me asking what I did for work, Amanda would interrupt with "Bartworks in construction" before pulling the conversation in another direction. I excused myself to get a drink standing alone at the bar, where I overheard Amanda's uncle talking to a colleague. Poor Mandy could have had her pick of suitable matches. Wilson Developments would have benefited from a strategic marriage. Instead, she brought home a construction worker. Harold was devastated, but what could he do? I downed my scotch in one gulp, memories flooding back of all the times I had tried to connect with the Wilsons only to be subtly or not so subtly rebuffed. There was the Christmas when I spent 3 months of evenings and weekends building Amanda a handcrafted oak jewelry box with secret compartments and custom inlays. When she opened it, her first response was, "Oh, you made it yourself." Her tone made it clear this was not a compliment. Later that same evening, she gushed over her parents' gift of a store-bought designer bracelet, showing it off to everyone, while my carefully crafted present sat forgotten on a side table. Or the time I used my construction contacts to get prime tickets to a show Amanda had been dying to see. Throughout the evening, she seemed more concerned about being spotted with me by her colleagues than enjoying the performance. When I finally saved enough to launch my own small contracting business focusing on eco-friendly renovations, I expected Amanda to be proud. Instead, she asked if I could find a silent partner to be the public face of the company. "Your hands look like you dig ditches for a living," she said, when I suggested attending a networking event with her. "My colleagues would never take you seriously." The most painful memory was from 2 years ago, when I overheard Amanda on the phone with her sister. "Of course, I am not happy," she had said, unaware that I had come home early. "I married beneath me. Everyone knows it. I should have found someone at my level." I had confronted her about it, and she apologized, blaming work stress and too much wine. But those words had lingered between us, an unhealed wound that tonight's events were rubbing raw again. My thoughts were interrupted by Harold taking the stage for his retirement speech. For 30 minutes, he talked about his journey building Wilson Development Group from humble beginnings to the powerhouse it was today. He thanked his wife, his daughters, his executive team, and even his golf partners. My name never crossed his lips despite the fact that I had been part of the family for 8 years. After the speech during dinner, I sat silently as the table conversation revolved around business deals, vacation properties, and private school applications for Amanda's nieces and nephews. When I tried to join a discussion about sustainable building practices, a topic I was knowledgeable about, Harold's business partner Jeffrey cut me off. "Let us leave the nuts and bolts to the contractors," he laughed, raising his glass. "We are the visionaries who make it all possible." The table erupted in laughter while Amanda stared intently at her plate. She did not defend me. When it came time for family photos, Catherine arranged everyone in front of a backdrop featuring the company logo. I moved to stand beside Amanda, but her mother gestured for me to step aside. "Just family for this one," she said with a thin smile. "You can be in the next one. There never was a next one." I watched as Amanda posed with her parents and sister, their coordinated outfits, and practiced smiles, projecting the perfect family image. I was an outsider despite the wedding ring on my finger. Unable to bear any more humiliation, I slipped away from the main ballroom and found a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool against my face, a relief after the suffocating atmosphere inside. I was not alone on the balcony. An elderly man stood at the railing, smoking a cigar and gazing at the city lights. He turned as I approached, nodding in greeting. "Too stuffy in there for you too, huh?" he asked, his voice gravelly but kind. "Something like that," I replied, loosening my tie. He offered me a cigar, which I accepted gratefully. As we smoked in companionable silence, I found myself relaxing for the first time that evening. "Frank Reynolds," he introduced himself, eventually extending a hand. Harold's first investor and business partner back, when we actually had to get our hands dirty. I shook his hand. Bartholomew Winters, Amanda's husband. Recognition flickered in his eyes. The builder, right? Harold mentioned you work in construction. Bracing for the usual condescension, I was surprised when Frank continued with genuine interest. What kind of projects do you work on? For the next 20 minutes, Frank and I discussed construction techniques, sustainable building materials, and the challenges of managing work crews. He asked intelligent questions and shared stories from development projects around the world. It was the most engaged conversation I had had all night. I am working on an affordable housing development in East Boston right now, I explained, trying to incorporate green building practices while keeping costs down. It is challenging but rewarding. Frank nodded appreciatively. That is real work, son. Making spaces where people actually live their lives. Never let anyone tell you different. I found myself telling him about my dream of expanding my contracting business to focus on environmentally conscious renovations for older buildings, preserving their character while improving efficiency. Sounds like you have got a solid vision, Frank said, stubbing out his cigar. Reminds me of someone else I knew years ago. He gazed back into the ballroom thoughtfully. You know, Harold was not always the polished businessman you see in there. What do you mean? I asked. Frank turned to face me fully. Son, has Harold ever told you how he started in this business? When I shook my head, Frank laughed. I am not surprised. Our Harold has spent decades reinventing himself. What Frank told me next shook the foundations of everything I thought I knew about my father-in-law. Harold Wilson was once Harry Williams, a carpenter from South Boston. We met on a construction site in 1975. I had inherited some money and was looking to invest in property. Harry was the most skilled builder on the crew with an eye for potential that nobody else had. I stared at Frank in disbelief as he continued. We started buying rundown properties with Harry doing most of the renovation work himself. He was brilliant with his hands, could look at a decrepit building and see exactly how to bring it back to life. Frank pulled out his wallet and showed me a faded photograph of two young men standing in front of a partially renovated brownstone. One was unmistakably a younger Frank. The other, in work boots and covered in dust, bore a striking resemblance to Harold. He changed his name when we started moving in higher circles. Thought Wilson sounded more professional than Williams. Started wearing suits instead of work clothes, took speech classes to lose the South Boston accent. Eventually, he stopped mentioning his construction background altogether, telling people he had always been on the business side. I was trying to process this information when Frank asked, "What was your father's name, son?" "Robert Winters," I replied automatically. Frank's eyes widened. "Bobby Winters. From the Lexington crew." My heart nearly stopped. "You knew my father." "Knew him," Frank laughed. "Bobby Winters was Harry's best friend back in the day, best damn woodworker in Massachusetts. They apprenticed together under Old Man Sullivan. My father had died when I was 17, taking with him many of the stories from his early career. I had known he worked in construction all his life, but he had never mentioned knowing Harold Wilson. That cannot be right, I said, shaking my head. My father-in-law has never acknowledged knowing my dad. Frank's expression grew serious. When was the last time Harold saw your father? They met at our wedding, I said. Amanda introduced them like strangers. Frank swore under his breath. That sorry coward. He would not even acknowledge Bobby's son. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Son, your father and Harry were not just colleagues. When Harry and I started our first development company, Bobby Winters designed and built all our custom cabinetry and woodwork. It was his craftsmanship that set our properties apart and built our reputation for quality. Frank was not finished. When Harry needed capital for his second development, Bobby took out a second mortgage on his house to loan him the money. That development made Harry his first million. I felt dizzy with this revelation. My father helped build Harold's company. More than that, Frank said grimly. When the recession hit in the early 90s and Bobby's business was struggling, he asked Harry for help. By then, Harry was Harold Wilson, moving in elite circles. He turned Bobby away, claimed he was overextended. A year later, he bought the property where Bobby's workshop stood and tore it down for luxury condos. My father had lost his workshop when I was in high school. He had never explained the full circumstances, only that he had to start over. He had taken jobs on construction sites to make ends meet, eventually working himself into an early grave. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Because I have watched Harold reinvent himself, denying his roots and the people who helped him along the way," Frank replied. "And tonight I saw how he and his family treat you as skilled tradesmen just like he once was." "It is not right, son. Bobby Winters was worth 10 of the man Harold became." Frank straightened his jacket. "Come on, let us go back inside. It is time Harold remembered where he came from." Before I could protest, Frank led me back into the ballroom, straight toward the center table where Harold was holding court with his most important guests. Amanda saw us approaching, and her eyes widened in alarm. Harold Frank called out, his voice carrying across the room. "I want to introduce you to someone special." The conversations around us quieted as Frank placed his hand on my shoulder. "Good to see you, sir," Frank said to me loudly. "Your father would be proud of what you have built." The room went completely silent. Harold froze his champagne glass halfway to his lips. Amanda looked between us in confusion. Every face in our vicinity had turned to stare. Bobby Winters' son Frank announced to the table. "One of the finest craftsmen I have had the pleasure of knowing, just like his father." Harold's face had drained of all color. Several of the older guests exchanged glances of recognition at my father's name. "Bobby Winters," one of them asked. "The cabinet maker. I had no idea his son married your daughter, Harold." Harold could not meet my eyes. Amanda stepped forward, confusion evident on her face. "What is going on?" she asked. "Dad, do you know Bart's father, Frank?" Did not give Harold time to formulate a response. Know him. Harold and Bobby were best friends for 20 years. Bobby's craftsmanship is what put Wilson Developments on the map. Frank turned to address the wider audience that had gathered around us. Before Harold was driving a Mercedes and floating bonds, he was swinging a hammer alongside Bobby Winters, the finest carpenter I ever knew, and the man whose investment helped fund Riverside Towers. Riverside Towers was the development that had established Wilson Development Group as a major player in Boston real estate. I had never known my father had any connection to it. Dad, Amanda turned to Harold, whose composure had completely crumbled. "Is this true?" Harold set down his glass with a shaking hand and finally met my gaze. In his eyes I saw something I had never expected: fear and shame. "I should have told you," he said quietly. "Your father was a good man. The best craftsman I ever knew." The room remained silent as decades of carefully constructed pretense cracked and fell away. In that moment, I had a choice. I could publicly humiliate Harold the way he and his family had humiliated me countless times. I could demand answers about his treatment of my father. I could walk out taking Amanda's illusions about her father with me. Instead, I reached for a nearby champagne glass and raised it high. To Harold Wilson, I said clearly, a man who understood that success is built from the ground up. The tension in the room broke as people hesitantly raised their glasses, unsure what was happening, but relieved that apparent conflict had been avoided. My father taught me that what we build with our hands can outlast us. I continued, looking directly at Harold. That integrity in construction means doing right by the people who will live and work in the spaces we create. I have tried to honor that legacy in my own work, and I recognize that same commitment to quality in Wilson Development's projects. Harold's eyes filled with tears as I spoke. I was offering him a lifeline, a way to acknowledge the truth without losing face entirely. "Thank you, Bartholomew," he said hoarsely when I finished. "Bobby would indeed be proud of the man you have become." As guests returned to their conversations, Harold gestured for me to join him at a quiet corner table. Amanda followed, still looking bewildered. "I owe you both an explanation," Harold began. For the next hour, Harold told Amanda the true story of his beginnings. How he had grown up poor in South Boston, learned construction from his uncle, met my father on a job site, and together they had dreamed of building something significant. "When opportunity came, I took it," Harold admitted. "I changed my name, changed my accent, changed my friends. I convinced myself it was necessary to succeed in a world that looks down on men who work with their hands." He looked at me with genuine regret. "When Amanda brought you home, it was like seeing a ghost of my past. I was afraid you would recognize me for what I was, not what I pretended to be. So I kept you at a distance. It was wrong, and I am sorry." Amanda sat in stunned silence as her father continued. "Your father saved my business, Bartholomew. During the recession of '82, when banks were calling in loans, Bobby gave me every penny he had saved. I promised to pay him back with interest, but when success came, I wanted to forget where I had started. I told myself that the connections I gave him were payment enough." Harold wiped his eyes. "When his business failed in the 90 seconds and he came to me for help, I turned him away. I told myself it was just business, but the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that helping Bobby would remind everyone that I had once been just like him, Amanda found her voice at last. "All these years you have made me ashamed of marrying a builder, when you yourself were one." Her voice trembled with anger and hurt. "You let me believe that Bart was beneath us when his father once saved yours. How could you?" Harold had no answer for his daughter. The carefully constructed image he had maintained for decades had crumbled in a single evening. Frank Reynolds joined us, placing a hand on Harold's shoulder. "It is never too late to make amends, Harry." He used Harold's old name deliberately. "You have achieved everything you wanted. Is not it time to remember who helped you get here?" Over the following weeks, my relationship with Harold transformed. He invited me to his office, showed me original blueprints from projects my father had worked on, photographs he had kept hidden of the two of them as young men on construction sites. "Your father had vision," Harold told me. "He could see potential where others saw only problems to solve." When I shared my plans for expanding my contracting business to focus on sustainable renovation, Harold listened with genuine interest. By the end of our meeting, he had offered to invest in my company and introduce me to his network of developers interested in green building. "No silent partners," he insisted, referring to Amanda's past suggestion. "This should be your name, your vision. Winter's Sustainable Construction has a good ring to it." My relationship with Amanda underwent its own renovation. The revelation about her father had forced her to confront her own prejudices and the harm they had caused our marriage. "I have been horrible to you," she admitted during a long, painful conversation in our kitchen. "I spent so long trying to be what I thought my father wanted that I lost sight of what actually matters." It took time to rebuild trust between us. Amanda attended the opening of my first major sustainable housing project, proudly introducing herself as Bart's wife to my colleagues and clients. She visited job sites, asked questions about my work, and slowly began to understand the skill and intelligence required in my profession. The journey was not always smooth. Years of conditioning did not disappear overnight. There were moments when old habits reasserted themselves, when Amanda would flinch at my work clothes or hesitate before introducing me to new acquaintances. But each time she caught herself remembered and chose differently. As for me, I learned that true dignity comes not from others' validation but from within. My father had taught me the value of skilled work and personal integrity. For years, I had allowed Amanda and her family to make me doubt my worth. Never again. I expanded my business, hired apprentices from underserved communities, and established a scholarship in my father's name for young people entering the building trades. Harold matched my contribution, a small step toward acknowledging the debt he owed to Robert Winters. Success came not by denying my identity as a builder but by embracing it fully. My company developed a reputation for quality craftsmanship and innovative sustainable design. Ironically, it was the very qualities the Wilsons had once dismissed that eventually brought professional respect and financial success. Perhaps the greatest change was in Harold himself. At 72, freed from the burden of pretense, he began volunteering with a program teaching construction skills to at-risk youth. On weekends, the man who once refused to acknowledge his working-class roots could be found in work boots and jeans, patiently showing teenagers how to frame a wall or install a window. "Your father would laugh himself silly if he could see me now," Harold told me recently, back where I started with sawdust in my pockets. The most profound lesson from this experience is that we cannot build anything of lasting value on a foundation of shame and denial. Whether constructing a building or a life, integrity in the materials and methods is essential. Harold spent decades running from his origins only to discover that acknowledging them brought him more peace than all his wealth and status ever had. I still work with my hands every day, creating spaces where families will live their lives. I still come home with calluses and occasionally sawdust in my hair. But now when I walk into a room, I do so with the quiet confidence of a man who knows his true worth. What about you? Have you ever discovered an unexpected truth that changed how you saw yourself or someone close to you? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Your support helps this channel grow, and I appreciate each and every one of you who takes the time to connect. Remember, we all have foundations we build upon. What matters most is that they are solid and true.